He saved a man's life, then got treated like a criminal for doing it. A broke black taxi driver had only $37 left to keep a roof over his family's head when he spotted a soaking old man collapsing at a bus stop in the middle of a cold Chicago storm. Everyone else kept driving. Malik Carter stopped. What seemed like a simple act of kindness cost him his home, his job, and nearly everything he had. But the old man wasn't who he appeared to be. By the next morning, powerful people were searching for Malik, and a forgotten secret from 15 years earlier began to surface. What followed would connect a struggling taxi driver, a billionaire family, and a promise that had survived through time, loss, and impossible odds. Stay with this story until the end, because one decision made in the rain would change far more than one life. It would transform an entire community forever. On a rain-soaked Tuesday night in Chicago, Malik Carter had $37 to his name, a taxi that did not belong to him, and one more hour before the city decided whether his family would sleep under a roof or under somebody's mercy. The rain had been falling since sundown, thick and cold, washing the streets until the neon signs bled across the pavement in long red and blue streaks. South Side looked different in weather like that. The corner stores pulled their gates down early. The buses hissed at the curbs like tired animals. People kept their heads low and their collars high, moving fast beneath broken umbrellas, trying not to make eye contact with anyone who might need something from them. Malik knew that look. He had worn it himself. He drove with both hands on the wheel, shoulders hunched beneath a faded black jacket that had lost its warmth 2 winters ago. The heater in the cab worked only when it felt generous, coughing out more sound than heat. The windshield wipers dragged across the glass with a tired squeak, leaving behind cloudy half-moons that made the traffic lights smear like wet paint. On the dashboard, the meter glowed red. $12.80. That was what the last passenger had owed him. A young man in a wool coat, smelling of expensive cologne and restaurant wine, who had thrown a 20 into the front seat like he was feeding a parking machine. "Keep the change," the man had said, then hesitated just long enough to look Malik over. "You know where you're going next time, right? I almost thought you were taking me the long way." Malik had smiled because a man who needed money learned when to swallow fire. "Yes, sir," he had said. He had not taken the long way. He had taken the only way around a flooded underpass, but explaining that to certain people only made them hear attitude. Now the 20 sat folded in the cup holder with the rest of the night's earnings. $37 total after gas, after the company lease, after the coffee he had bought at a corner diner so he would not fall asleep behind the wheel. $37 that needed to become 45 before morning if he wanted Mrs. Alvarez, the woman who owned the rooming house on 71st, to let Tasha and Noah stay another week. His little sister had called him twice already. He had not answered the second time. He loved Tasha more than anybody alive, but he could not listen to her pretend she was not scared. Not tonight. Not while Noah was probably asleep on the old pull-out couch, one small hand tucked beneath his cheek, his school backpack already packed, because the boy believed tomorrow would happen the way adults promised it would. Malik glanced at the money again. $37. Not enough, but close enough to hurt. Dispatch crackled from the small radio clipped beneath the dash, the voice of Earl, the night dispatcher, coming through static and rain. "Malik, you near Bronzeville?" Malik pressed the button. "Close. Got a pickup outside a steakhouse on Michigan. Couple heading to River North. Good fare if they don't cancel." Malik looked at the time. If he made that run, he might clear the room money, maybe even have enough left for Noah's lunch account, which had gone negative again last Friday. "I'm on it," he said. He turned left through a yellow light and headed north. That was when he saw the old man. At first, Malik thought it was a pile of laundry left under the bus shelter at 43rd and King Drive. A pale coat, a bent shape, something slumped too low against the side of the glass. The bus stop light above flickered, buzzing in the rain, making everything look like a scene caught on an old security camera. Then the shape moved. Malik slowed without meaning to. The old man stood outside the shelter, not under it, as if he had forgotten what shelter was for. Rain poured off his white hair and ran down the sides of his face. His coat was expensive once, camel-colored wool, but now it hung heavy and dark with water. One shoe was untied. His hands trembled in front of him, fingers opening and closing around a few coins that kept slipping from his grip onto the sidewalk. A city bus roared past without stopping. The wind from it nearly knocked him over. Malik's foot hovered above the brake. "Do not stop," he told himself. He had a fare waiting, a real fare, the kind that could make the difference between a locked door and a warm room. He had seen plenty of people in trouble before, some drunk, some high, some lost, some dangerous. Every driver had stories about stopping for the wrong stranger on the wrong night. Every driver had learned the hard rule of late shifts. Kindness could get you robbed, fired, or worse. The old man looked up. For 1 second, their eyes met through the rain-smeared windshield. There was no anger in that face, no threat. Just fear so bare it made Malik's chest tighten. The man tried to raise one hand, maybe to wave, maybe to ask for help, but his knees seemed to forget their job. He staggered sideways, caught the bus sign with his shoulder, and slid down toward the curb. Malik hit the brakes. A horn blasted behind him. Someone shouted from a passing car. He didn't hear the words. He was already pulling over. The steakhouse fare crackled through dispatch again. "Malik, you still taking that River North pickup?" He stared at the old man lying half on the sidewalk, half in the gutter, rainwater running around his shoes. The red meter light glowed in the corner of his vision. $37. Tasha's voice lived in his head. "Malik, I don't know what we're going to do if she locks us out." Noah's face followed it. "Uncle Malik, when you get your own taxi, can I ride in the front?" Malik swallowed hard. Then he reached over and shut the meter off. The red numbers went dark. He grabbed the old umbrella from the passenger floor, though one rib was broken and the fabric sagged in the middle. He pushed open the door and stepped into the rain. Cold hit him like a hand to the face. "Sir!" Malik called, rushing across the slick pavement. "Sir, can you hear me?" The old man's eyes fluttered. His lips were tinted blue around the edges. Up close, he looked older than Malik first thought. Maybe late 70s, maybe 80, with deep lines carved around his mouth and forehead. His skin was cold when Malik touched his wrist. "Hey," Malik said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "My name's Malik. I'm going to help you, all right? You fell pretty hard." The old man mumbled something. Malik leaned closer. "What was that? Bus?" the man whispered. I missed the boy." Malik frowned. "What boy?" The old man's wet fingers gripped Malik's sleeve with surprising strength. His eyes opened wider, cloudy and terrified. "The boy stayed," he said. "Smoke everywhere. He stayed." A chill moved through Malik that had nothing to do with the rain. Another car passed, slowing just enough for the driver to look. The woman behind the wheel stared at Malik kneeling beside the old white man, then quickly drove on. Malik saw that look too. Suspicion first. Always suspicion. He ignored it. "Come on," he said gently. "We need to get you out of this rain." The old man tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Malik caught him under the arms and lifted slowly, careful not to hurt him. The man was lighter than he should have been, all bone and soaked wool. Malik guided him toward the taxi one step at a time, the broken umbrella useless above them. "Easy," Malik said. "I got you. Just lean on me." The old man shivered so hard his teeth clicked. "I don't have money," he whispered. Malik opened the back door. "I didn't ask you for money." The man looked at him then, really looked, as if those words were harder to understand than the rain, the street, or the night. Malik helped him into the back seat and pulled the door shut against the wind. The cab instantly filled with the smell of wet wool, rainwater, and cold fear. He shrugged out of his jacket and laid it across the old man's shoulders. The old man stared at him through the rearview mirror. "What's your name, sir?" Malik asked, sliding back behind the wheel and turning the heater as high as it would go. The vents wheezed. For a long moment, there was only rain striking the roof. Then the old man lifted his wrist. A silver medical bracelet hung loose against his skin. Malik reached back gently and turned it toward the dim dashboard light. "Henry Whitmore, memory care patient. Emergency contact. Charles Whitmore." Malik froze. Whitmore. Everybody in Chicago knew that name, even if they had never stepped inside one of their hotels. Whitmore Suites, Whitmore Grand, Whitmore Harbor. Tall glass buildings downtown with gold letters over polished doors. Places where Malik sometimes dropped off guests who never looked at him twice. He looked at the old man again. This soaking, shaking stranger at a South Side bus stop was not just somebody's grandfather. He was Henry Whitmore. And if the bracelet was right, somebody very powerful was probably looking for him. Malik's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Tasha again. He let it ring. The old man began to cough, a thin, painful sound that made his whole body fold forward. Malik checked the mirror and felt panic tighten in his ribs. "Mr. Whitmore, stay with me," he said. "You hear me? Stay with me." Henry's eyes moved weakly toward the front seat. "The boy," he whispered. "I never thanked him." Malik pulled away from the curb and into traffic. Dispatch crackled again, irritated now. "Malik, that steakhouse fare canceled. Where are you?" Malik picked up the radio, looked at Henry in the mirror, and made the decision before fear could talk him out of it. "I'm off route," he said. Earl's voice sharpened. "Off route where?" "Hospital. You got a paying fare?" Malik glanced at the dead meter. Rain hammered the windshield. The old man shivered beneath his jacket, lips still too blue, eyes floating somewhere between past and present. "No," Malik said quietly. "I got a man who needs help." There was a pause on the radio. Then Earl sighed. "You know the lease is still due tonight." "I know. You short again. They'll pull that car, Malik." "I know." He set the radio down. Ahead, the city opened into wet lanes and shining headlights. Somewhere north, a wealthy couple had already found another ride. Somewhere south, Tasha was probably staring at her phone, wondering why her brother would not pick up. Somewhere inside the old man behind him was a memory about smoke, a boy, and a debt that had waited years to be spoken. Malik pressed the gas. The taxi moved through the rain, its roof light glowing yellow in the dark like one small promise the city had not managed to put out. And by morning, every news station in Chicago would be asking the same question. Who was the broke black taxi driver who vanished after saving Henry Whitmore? Malik Carter had no idea the question was already beginning to spread across the city. At that moment, all he knew was that the old man in his back seat was shivering. The rain was getting worse, and the heater in the taxi sounded like it was about to give up its last breath. The streets shimmered beneath the storm. Red lights reflected across puddles. Storefront signs glowed through sheets of rain. The city looked beautiful from a distance. Up close, it felt expensive. Malik gripped the steering wheel tighter and glanced at the rearview mirror. Henry Whitmore's eyes were half closed. His head leaned against the window. His lips were still too pale. "Stay with me, Mr. Whitmore." The old man stirred slightly. "You know my name? It's on your bracelet." Henry looked down at his wrist as if seeing it for the first time. "Oh." His voice sounded small, lost, like a child waking up in a strange place. Malik had heard that sound before. His mother used to make it near the end. Not his actual mother. Mrs. Evelyn Jackson, the elderly woman who had lived next door to his family when he was growing up. She had watched Malik after school when his father worked double shifts. Years later, dementia had stolen her memories piece by piece. Some days she recognized him. Some days she thought he was her brother. Some days she stared right through him. The disease always seemed crueler because it didn't take people all at once. It took them a little at a time. Malik checked the mirror again. "Do you remember where you were headed tonight?" Henry frowned. The question seemed to travel through a maze before reaching him. "The station." "What station?" "The train station." A pause. "No." His forehead wrinkled. "Maybe church." Another pause. "The boy." His voice cracked. "I was looking for the boy." Malik exhaled quietly. Whatever story lived inside Henry Whitmore's mind was scattered in pieces. Right now, the important thing was getting him somewhere warm. His phone buzzed again. Tasha. For a second, he considered ignoring it. Then guilt won. He pressed the speaker button. "Hey." Relief flooded her voice immediately. "Malik, thank God." Rain hammered the roof above him. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You didn't answer." "I've been driving." There was silence. Not because she believed him. Because she knew he was worried. The same thing she was. Mrs. Alvarez came by again. Malik closed his eyes briefly. There it was. The conversation he had been avoiding all night. What did she say? What she always says. Tasha tried to sound casual. She failed. She wants the money by morning. Malik looked at the cup holder. $37. Not enough. How much are we short now? A pause. 37. The exact number sat between them, heavy as concrete. Neither spoke. From the back seat, Henry coughed. Tasha heard it. Who's that? A passenger. You still working? I'm trying. Another pause. Then her voice softened. Malik. He already knew what she was going to say. You don't have to carry everything. He almost laughed. Who else was going to carry it? Noah was 10. Tasha was working 3 part-time jobs that barely covered groceries. Their father was gone. Their mother had been gone even longer. Sometimes carrying everything wasn't a choice. It was just what happened when nobody else could. I'm almost there, he lied. Tasha didn't argue. She knew the sound of a lie told for love. Okay. Then quietly. Noah stayed up waiting for you. That hurt worse than the landlord. Worse than the bills. Because Noah still believed adults could fix things. Tell him I'll be home soon. I will. The call ended. The silence returned. Only rain. Only traffic. Only the old man's uneven breathing. Malik drove north toward the hospital. The emergency entrance glowed ahead like a lighthouse. For a brief second, he thought about the steakhouse fare he had missed. Thought about the tip. Thought about the money. Then he looked in the mirror. Henry's eyes were closed now. His shoulders trembled beneath Malik's jacket. The thought disappeared. Some things mattered more. even when you couldn't afford them. 20 minutes earlier, Malik had been driving downtown, trying to earn enough money to save a room. Now he was spending money he didn't have on a stranger. Life had a strange sense of humor. The hospital parking lot was crowded despite the hour. Ambulances sat beneath bright floodlights. Rainwater streamed across the pavement. Malik pulled under the emergency canopy and parked. "Mr. Whitmore." No response. His stomach tightened. "Henry." The old man's eyes opened slowly, confused, disoriented, but awake. "Thank God. We're here." Henry looked around. The bright lights seemed to frighten him. "No." His voice shook. "No hospitals. You need help. I have to find him." "The boy?" Henry nodded. "The boy who stayed." Malik frowned. The phrase again. The same phrase from the bus stop. Not a random memory. Not a random dream. Something important. Something buried deep enough that even dementia couldn't erase it. But there was no time to think about it. Henry tried to push himself upright. His hands trembled violently. Malik got out and hurried around the vehicle. Cold rain soaked him instantly. He opened the rear door. "Come on." Henry looked at him. For a moment, his cloudy eyes seemed startlingly clear. "You didn't leave." The words caught Malik off guard. "What?" "Everyone leaves." The old man swallowed. "But you stayed." Something shifted inside Malik. A quiet ache. Because he knew exactly what that felt like. He had spent most of his life watching people leave. Friends, employers, promises, opportunities. His father. Yet somehow he smiled. "Let's get you inside." The emergency doors slid open. Warm air spilled out. A nurse looked up from the desk. Then another. Then a security guard. The reaction was immediate. Not gratitude. Not concern. Suspicion. Malik knew the look. A soaked black man bringing in an elderly white man after midnight. People saw what they expected to see. Not what happened. The security guard approached first. "Sir." Not directed at Henry. Directed at Malik. "What's going on here?" Malik kept his voice calm. "I found him outside in the rain." "Found him where?" "Bus stop." The guard's eyes narrowed. Henry swayed slightly. A nurse rushed forward. "Oh my God." She grabbed a wheelchair. "What happened to him?" "He was freezing." Malik stepped aside. "I brought him in." The nurse began checking Henry's pulse. Another nurse examined the bracelet. Her expression changed instantly. "Whitmore." The word spread. Like electricity. Whitmore. Everyone knew that name. Suddenly more staff appeared. More attention. More urgency. But not for Malik. For Henry. A second security guard arrived. This one older. Hard eyes. He looked Malik up and down, then asked the question. "Did you take anything from him?" The lobby went silent. For 1 second, even the rain seemed quieter. Malik stared. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. Deeply tired. Because somehow he had known that would be the first question. Not, "Did you save him?" Not, "How did you help?" Not, "Thank you." "Did you take anything?" The older guard waited. Malik slowly shook his head. "No." The guard looked unconvinced. The younger nurse seemed embarrassed. She glanced away. Henry suddenly reached out. His trembling hand grabbed Malik's sleeve. "No." The old man's voice was weak but firm. "No." Everyone looked at him. Henry blinked, confused. then looked directly at Malik. He helped me. The room fell silent. Even the guards stepped back slightly. The nurse softened. Let's get you warm, Mr. Whitmore. Orderlies arrived with a wheelchair. They carefully settled Henry into it. As they began rolling him away, the old man twisted around, looking back at Malik, searching his face, like he was trying desperately to remember something. Then he disappeared through the emergency doors. Gone. Just like that. The lobby felt strangely empty. A clerk approached with paperwork. Sir, we'll need your information. Malik looked toward the hallway where Henry had vanished. No. The clerk blinked. Excuse me? He needs help. The woman frowned. We just need your name. Malik shook his head. Not necessary. He turned toward the exit. The younger nurse hurried after him. Wait. He stopped. Thank you. She looked genuinely sincere. I mean it. For the first time that night, someone had said the words. Malik smiled. Small, tired. Take care of him. Then he walked back into the rain. Outside, the city was still soaked, still cold, still indifferent. He climbed into his taxi, looked at the cup holder. $37. Then at the gas gauge, almost empty, and finally at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Too late to earn much more, too late to catch up, too late for a lot of things. His phone buzzed again. A text this time. From the taxi company. Payment due by 6 a.m. Failure to pay will result in vehicle repossession. Malik stared at the message. The rain drummed softly overhead. For a long moment he sat there without moving, without speaking, without hope. Then he started the engine. Because that was what people like him did. You kept moving, even when the road ahead looked impossible. As he pulled away from the hospital, neither Malik nor anyone else knew that cameras inside the emergency room had already captured every second of what happened. And before sunrise, those images would land in the hands of a man who had spent years believing kindness always came with a price. A man named Charles Whitmore. At 3:08 in the morning, Malik Carter was still driving. Not because there were fares left to chase, not because there was money left to earn, but because going home felt harder than staying on the road. Chicago looked different after midnight. The traffic thinned, the sidewalks emptied, the city seemed to exhale. Streetlights painted long pools of gold across wet pavement. The elevated train rattled through the darkness like a distant memory. Rainwater dripped from fire escapes and old brick buildings, tapping against the night in a slow, steady rhythm. Malik drove beneath it all with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the cup holder. $37. Still there. Still not enough. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Tasha. It was Noah. A text message. Simple. 3 words. You coming home? Malik stared at the screen longer than he should have. His chest tightened. Noah was only 10 years old, too young to understand overdue rent, too young to understand eviction notices, too young to understand why adults sometimes sat awake at night staring at numbers that refused to work, yet somehow the boy always knew when something was wrong. Malik typed a response. Soon, buddy. Then deleted it. He typed another. Just finishing work. Sent. The lie felt smaller that way. The rain softened as he headed south. Without realizing it, he found himself driving toward the neighborhood where he'd grown up. The old streets looked smaller now. The corner grocery where his mother used to buy bread. The laundromat where she folded uniforms late into the night. The church whose bell still rang every Sunday morning. Most of the faces had changed. The buildings hadn't. Pain had a way of staying longer than people. Malik pulled over near a small park. The swings moved slightly in the wind. The basketball court sat empty beneath the streetlights. For a while he just sat there, watching, thinking, remembering. His father loved winter. That was the strange part. Whenever people asked about Curtis Carter, they expected stories about hardship, long shifts, bills, stress, and there had been plenty of those. But what Malik remembered most was laughter. His father laughing while shoveling snow. His father laughing when the old car refused to start. His father laughing when the power went out and they ate dinner by candlelight. Bad days only win if you let them, Curtis used to say. Then one February night, 14 years ago, his father never came home. A truck slid through an icy intersection. A chain reaction followed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing people would put on the news. Just ordinary bad luck. The kind that changes everything. What haunted Malik wasn't the accident itself. It was what came afterward. Witnesses later told police his father had survived the initial crash. He was conscious, talking, asking for help. Cars kept passing. Drivers slowed down, looked, then drove away. Some were scared. Some were busy. Some assumed someone else would stop. Eventually someone did. But too late. The memory never left Malik. Not because he blamed strangers, because he understood them. People were tired. People were struggling. People were afraid. Still, a small part of him always wondered what might have happened if just one person had stopped sooner. One person, one decision, one act of kindness. That question followed him into adulthood like a shadow. It followed him every time he saw someone stranded on the roadside, every time he noticed an elderly person struggling with groceries, every time he watched people look away from someone who needed help. And tonight, it had followed him to a bus stop in the rain. Malik leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The old man's voice echoed in his mind. The boy stayed. The words felt familiar somehow, not familiar enough to understand, just enough to bother him. His phone rang. Tasha again. This time he answered immediately. "Hey." Her voice sounded exhausted. "You okay?" "Yeah." "You don't sound okay." Malik smiled despite himself. Tasha always knew. Just tired. Silence. Then, "Mrs. Alvarez came by twice." He nodded even though she couldn't see him. "I figured. She wasn't mean about it. That somehow made it worse. Mean landlords were easy. Kind landlords with bills of their own were harder. She says she can wait until morning." Morning. A deadline disguised as mercy. "Okay. You saved somebody tonight, didn't you?" Malik opened his eyes. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. "How do you know? You always get quiet after you help somebody." He laughed softly. The first real laugh all night. Tasha continued. "You've been doing that since we were kids." "Doing what?" "Putting everybody else first." Malik looked through the windshield. At the empty park. At the wet swings. At the dark city. Somebody has to. No. Her voice became gentle. Somebody doesn't. The words lingered. Because deep down he knew she was right. He wasn't helping people because somebody had to. He was helping because he couldn't stop himself. Because every time he saw someone abandoned, he saw his father. Because every time he saw someone scared, he remembered being the scared kid waiting by a window for a man who never came home. Because kindness had become less of a choice and more of a reflex, sometimes a costly one, sometimes a painful one, always the same. Tasha sighed. Noah's asleep. Good. He left something on the table. What? A drawing. Malik smiled. The boy was always drawing. Cars, buildings, superheroes. What's this one? Tasha laughed quietly. It's you. Malik shook his head. That's unfortunate. No. Her voice softened again. It's actually kind of beautiful. He didn't know why that hurt. Maybe because nobody had called anything about his life beautiful in a very long time. Get some sleep, Tasha said. You too. The call ended. For a long moment, Malik sat alone. Then he started the engine. Home was still waiting. Bills were still waiting. Morning was still coming. There was no avoiding any of it. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced once more at the $37 in the cup holder. $37. The difference between safety and uncertainty. The difference between staying and losing everything. And yet somehow, despite all of it, he knew something with complete certainty. If he drove past that bus stop again, if he saw that old man again, if he had to make the same choice twice, he would stop every single time. What Malik didn't know was that while he was driving home through the sleeping city, Henry Whitmore was waking up in a private hospital room, and the first words out of the old man's mouth would send shockwaves through one of the wealthiest families in America. I found him, Henry whispered. The nurse leaned closer. Found who? A tear rolled down the old man's cheek. The boy who stayed. And for the first time in 15 years, someone in the Whitmore family would finally start listening. The words hung in the hospital room long after Henry Whitmore stopped speaking. Rain tapped softly against the window. Machines hummed. A nurse adjusted an IV bag and glanced toward the hallway, unsure whether the old man's statement meant anything at all. But someone else heard it. Someone who had heard those exact words before. 3 floors above Henry's room, Charles Whitmore stood in a private conference suite, overlooking the sleeping city. At 52, Charles had the kind of face newspapers liked to photograph. Strong jaw, silver at the temples, perfect suits, controlled expressions. He looked like success. He looked like power. He looked nothing like a man who hadn't trusted another human being in years. A hospital administrator stood across from him. Your father is stable. Charles nodded. What happened? The administrator slid a tablet across the table. A taxi driver found him. Charles barely reacted. People found things every day. Lost wallets, lost pets, lost elderly men. Everything had a price. Everything had an angle. That was how the world worked. At least that's what experience had taught him. The administrator pressed play. Security footage appeared on the screen. A hospital entrance. Rain. An old man in a wheelchair. And beside him, a soaked black taxi driver. Charles watched silently. The driver wasn't asking questions, wasn't demanding attention, wasn't filming himself, wasn't waiting around for praise. He was simply helping. The footage continued. Security questioning him. The accusation. Did you take anything from him? Charles watched the driver's face. No anger, no performance. Just exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying too much for too long. Then the driver turned and walked away. No paperwork, no reward, no name, no request. Nothing. The video ended. Charles leaned back. The room felt strangely quiet. "What happened after that?" he asked. "He left. That's it?" "That's it." Charles stared at the blank screen. For some reason, that bothered him. People didn't leave. Not when they knew who Henry Whitmore was. Not when they realized what the Whitmore name could offer. People stayed. People always stayed. They stayed for favors, for connections, for publicity, for money. This man hadn't. The administrator cleared his throat. "There's one more thing." Charles looked up. "My father?" "No." The administrator hesitated. "The driver spent money on him." Charles frowned. "What?" "We reviewed nearby surveillance footage." The administrator handed him a report. "He stopped at a gas station before bringing Mr. Whitmore here." Charles scanned the page. Blanket, water, hand warmers, personal jacket given to patient. The purchases totaled just over $12. Charles stared. $12. The amount itself meant nothing. The fact that the driver spent it did, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning, especially for a stranger, especially without expecting anything in return. For a brief moment, Charles felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Confusion. Meanwhile, across the city, Malik Carter was finally heading home. The rain had softened into a cold mist. Chicago's skyline faded behind him, like a painting dissolving into darkness. His taxi smelled faintly of wet wool and hospital disinfectant. Henry Whitmore was gone. But somehow the old man still occupied the back seat. His voice, his confusion, his gratitude. His strange obsession with a boy nobody seemed to know. Malik rubbed his eyes. Fatigue settled deep into his bones. The dashboard clock read 4:41 a.m., less than 90 minutes before the taxi company deadline. Less than 4 hours before Mrs. Alvarez expected rent. The city slowly brightened around him. Not sunrise, just the gray promise of it. The kind of light that revealed problems instead of hiding them. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from the taxi company. Final notice. Payment required by 6 a.m. Failure will result in immediate vehicle recovery. Malik sighed. There it was. The future arriving exactly when promised. He pulled into a 24-hour gas station. Not because he needed gas, because he needed a minute. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A tired cashier watched a morning news broadcast while stocking shelves. The screen showed weather updates, traffic reports, local headlines. Nothing about Henry Whitmore. Not yet. Malik bought a cup of coffee using coins from the ashtray compartment. The machine produced something hot enough to qualify. Barely. He carried it outside and stood beneath the canopy. The rain smelled clean. The air smelled cold. Across the street, a city bus groaned to a stop. People climbed aboard. Night shift workers, hospital employees, janitors, security guards, the invisible army that kept Chicago moving while everybody else slept. Malik watched them. He understood every face, every tired expression, every silent calculation. Bills, rent, food, survival. One more week, one more month, one more chance. A movement near the entrance caught his attention. An elderly woman struggled with a grocery cart. One wheel refused to cooperate. The cart tilted awkwardly. A younger man brushed past her without looking. Another pretended not to notice. Malik took a sip of coffee, then set it down. Of course he did. 3 minutes later, he was helping load groceries into the woman's car. She smiled, thanked him twice, asked if he worked nearby. He said yes. She never knew she had just been helped by a man on the verge of losing everything. And Malik never told her. because that wasn't why he stopped. When he returned to his taxi, dawn had begun creeping across the horizon. Gray. Cold. Unforgiving. He started the engine. The fuel warning light immediately appeared. Perfect. Just perfect. He laughed once, a short, tired laugh, then headed home. 20 minutes later, he turned onto 71st Street. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always did. Brick buildings, corner stores, chain-link fences, life happening despite itself. For one brief second, hope flickered. Maybe Mrs. Alvarez would give them another day. Maybe the taxi company would wait. Maybe something unexpected would happen. Then he saw the moving truck. His stomach dropped. It sat directly outside the rooming house. 2 men loaded furniture into the back. Mrs. Alvarez stood near the entrance holding a clipboard. Malik slowed. No. Not yet. Please, not yet. He parked across the street, stepped out, and immediately saw Tasha. She stood on the sidewalk beside several trash bags and cardboard boxes. Noah sat on one of them, holding his backpack, holding his drawing, waiting. The sight hit harder than any punch ever could. Tasha looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Neither had to. The rooming house door stood open behind her. The decision had already been made. The deadline had already passed. And for the first time all night, Malik understood exactly how expensive $12 could be. Across the city, Charles Whitmore sat alone in a hospital conference room. The security footage replayed once more. The soaked taxi driver, the blanket, the hospital entrance, the quiet departure. Charles paused the image, zoomed in, studied the man's face. Then he reached for the phone. Get me everything you can find on this driver. His assistant hesitated. We don't have a name. Charles looked again at the frozen image. No, he said quietly. But we're going to. Outside the hospital window, the first light of morning spread across Chicago, and somewhere between a luxury hospital and a struggling neighborhood on the south side, 2 lives were moving toward each other. Neither one knew it yet. But before the day was over, the past would begin knocking on both their doors. For a long moment, Malik Carter stood across the street and stared at his family's belongings. Everything they owned fit into a small cluster of boxes, trash bags, and plastic storage bins sitting beside the curb. A lamp, 2 folding chairs, Noah's bicycle, 3 suitcases, an old microwave, a life reduced to inventory. The morning air felt colder than the rain had. Cars passed. People hurried to work. Nobody stopped. The city kept moving. It always did. No matter whose world was falling apart. Tasha noticed him first. Relief flashed across her face, then guilt, then sadness, the kind that comes when someone you love arrives too late to stop something. Malik. He crossed the street slowly. Noah jumped off the box and ran toward him. Uncle Malik! The boy wrapped both arms around his waist. Malik hugged him back immediately, held on a little longer than usual, because sometimes children reminded adults what mattered, and sometimes they reminded them what was at stake. You okay, buddy? Noah nodded. Mostly. That answer hurt more than tears. Mostly. 10-year-olds shouldn't have to learn words like mostly. Tasha folded her arms, trying not to cry. Failing. Mrs. Alvarez waited as long as she could. Malik looked toward the older woman standing near the entrance. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't angry either, just tired. The same tired everyone seemed to be lately. I know. Mrs. Alvarez approached slowly. Her gray sweater hung loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes looked older than they had last month. Malik. Mrs. Alvarez. She glanced toward the boxes, then back at him. You know I didn't want this. I know. You've always paid eventually. He nodded. Because it was true. Late. But paid. Every single time. Until now. The older woman sighed. The bank doesn't care that you're a good man. The words landed harder than she intended. She immediately looked sorry. But they were true. Good people still got bills. Good people still got evicted. Good people still lost. The world didn't grade character before handing out consequences. Malik looked away. Toward Noah. Toward the boxes. Toward anything except the shame threatening to rise in his chest. Where are we supposed to go? Tasha asked quietly. Mrs. Alvarez hesitated, then looked down. She didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one. Not a good one. Not for people who lived paycheck to paycheck. Not for people already behind. Not for families balancing on the edge before somebody nudged them off. A tow truck turned the corner. The sound made Malik freeze. No. Not now, please. The truck rolled slowly toward the curb, toward his taxi. The taxi company logo glistened beneath morning sunlight. The driver climbed out holding paperwork, and suddenly Malik understood. The second loss had arrived, right on schedule. The driver checked the plate number, then looked at Malik. Malik Carter? Yeah. Company order. The man lifted the clipboard. Vehicle recovery. Tasha closed her eyes. Noah looked confused. Malik simply stood there. Too tired to argue. Too tired to explain. Too tired for dignity. The driver seemed uncomfortable, almost apologetic. Look, man. It's okay. No, it isn't. The driver glanced away, because everyone understood what this meant. No taxi, no work, no work, no income, no income, no chance. Malik reached into the car, collected the few things that actually belonged to him. Phone charger, coffee thermos, a photo of Noah, then stepped back. The tow operator hooked the vehicle. Metal clanked. Chains tightened. And just like that, the taxi disappeared. The same taxi he'd spent years driving. The same taxi he'd spent all night using to save someone else's father. Gone. Noah stared. Uncle Malik, yeah? Can you get another one? The question nearly broke him. Children always believed solutions existed. Adults knew better. Still, he forced a smile. We'll figure something out. Noah nodded, satisfied. Because children trusted promises. Even broken men sometimes trusted them too. Across the city, inside Whitmore Memorial Hospital, a very different morning was unfolding. Henry Whitmore sat upright in bed, wrapped in blankets, color slowly returning to his face. A cardiologist reviewed charts, nurses adjusted monitors, assistants moved quietly through the room. But Henry wasn't paying attention. His gaze remained fixed on the doorway, waiting, searching, expecting someone. Charles entered first. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive silence. Morning, Dad. Henry looked disappointed, not because Charles was there, because he wasn't the person Henry hoped to see. Where is he? Charles pulled a chair closer. Who? The driver. Charles exchanged a glance with the nurse. The man from last night. Henry's voice grew stronger. The one who stayed. There it was again. That phrase. The same phrase from the footage. The same phrase from years of fragmented conversations nobody understood. Charles leaned forward. "Why do you keep saying that?" Henry blinked. Confusion clouded his face. For a moment it seemed he had already forgotten the question. Then, unexpectedly, the fog parted. Only slightly, only briefly. But enough. There was fire. Charles froze. The nurse looked away respectfully. This wasn't medical anymore. This was family. Henry swallowed. Smoke. His hands trembled. The boy stayed. Charles felt something shift deep inside him, because he remembered. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough. 15 years ago. Detroit. The hotel fire. His younger brother, the chaos, the fear. The missing details nobody could ever piece together afterward. The event their father never stopped talking about. The event that somehow refused to fade. Dad. Charles kept his voice low. What boy? Henry's eyes filled with tears. He saved him. Saved who? The old man looked directly at Charles, and for one shocking second, he seemed completely lucid. Your brother. The room went silent. Charles sat perfectly still. The air felt different, heavier, because suddenly a memory he hadn't visited in years had walked back into the room. Detroit. Fire alarms, smoke, sirens, his 17-year-old brother trapped inside, then somehow surviving. Nobody ever figuring out exactly how. Nobody ever finding the teenager who helped. Nobody ever identifying the witness. Just fragments, rumors, questions, and his father's obsession. The boy who stayed. Charles slowly stood. His pulse quickened. Get me every record from Detroit. The nurse looked confused. What? The fire. His voice sharpened. Every report. For the first time in years, Charles Whitmore wasn't thinking about stock prices, or hotels, or board meetings. He was thinking about a mystery, one that suddenly felt alive. Meanwhile, Malik and his family loaded their belongings into a borrowed pickup truck from a neighbor named Mr. Daniels. The old mechanic didn't ask questions, didn't lecture, didn't pity. He simply handed Malik the keys. Bring it back when you're standing again. That was all. Simple kindness. The kind people rarely talked about. The kind that saved lives every day. By noon, they were parked outside a small church shelter on the south side. A temporary solution. Not a home. Just a pause. The church director helped Noah carry boxes inside. Tasha tried smiling. Malik tried too. Neither one managed very well. As he carried the last storage bin through the door, a television mounted in the lobby caught his attention. Breaking news flashed across the screen. A reporter stood outside Whitmore Memorial Hospital. Behind her, cameras crowded the entrance. Police vehicles lined the curb. The headline read, Missing Business Icon Found Safe After Night-Long Search. Malik stopped walking. The reporter continued. Family representatives confirm 80-year-old Henry Whitmore was discovered early this morning and transported to safety by an unidentified taxi driver. His stomach tightened. The television switched to surveillance still images, blurry, rain-soaked, but recognizable. A wheelchair, a hospital entrance, a man beside it, his height, his build, his jacket, his silhouette. Malik. The shelter lobby fell quiet. Several people turned toward him, then toward the screen, then back again. Recognition slowly appeared. The church director blinked. Wait. Malik immediately looked away. Too late. The image remained on the television, frozen. For the first time since the night began, the city was starting to ask who he was. And somewhere across Chicago, Charles Whitmore had just received the first report from Detroit. Inside the file sat a witness statement, one sentence highlighted in yellow. A teenage black boy pulled the victim through smoke and remained at the scene until help arrived. Charles stared at the line, then slowly looked up. His father's words echoed again. The boy who stayed. And for the first time, Charles wondered if the man who saved Henry Whitmore last night might not be a stranger at all. The church shelter smelled faintly of coffee, old books, and fresh laundry. It wasn't home, but it was warm. And for the moment, warm was enough. Malik sat alone at a folding table near a window overlooking the parking lot. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Thin patches of sunlight pushed through the clouds, lighting the wet pavement in silver streaks. Across the room, Noah sat coloring in a workbook someone from the church had given him. Tasha was speaking quietly with a volunteer about temporary housing options. Neither of them looked in Malik's direction. Not because they blamed him, because they were trying not to make him feel worse. That somehow hurt more. Malik stared at his phone. No new messages. No new opportunities. No miracle. Just silence. The kind that follows disaster. A television mounted high on the wall continued running local news. Henry Whitmore's face appeared every few minutes. Then footage of the hospital. Then discussions about how the elderly billionaire had somehow wandered miles from a private care facility. Nobody knew exactly what happened. Nobody knew why. But everyone seemed fascinated. Money always attracted attention. A volunteer approached Malik carrying a paper cup. Coffee? He looked up. The woman smiled kindly. Late 60s, gray hair, gentle eyes. The type of person who had probably spent her entire life helping others. Thanks. She placed the cup down, then hesitated. You know, Malik already knew what was coming. She had seen the television, seen the footage, recognized him. You were the driver, weren't you? He didn't answer immediately. The volunteer smiled. Good thing you did. Then she walked away. No praise, no speech, just those 4 words. Good thing you did. Malik looked down at the coffee. Steam curled upward. For a moment he thought about everything he had lost in less than 12 hours. His room, his taxi, his income, his stability, his plan. $37 had become $0. And somehow, if he had the chance to go back and change his decision, he still wouldn't. That realization surprised him. Not because he was proud, because it felt irrational. The world had just punished him for doing the right thing, yet he couldn't regret it. Across Chicago, Charles Whitmore was staring at a different table, a conference table, 22 floors above downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan. Assistants moved quietly in and out. Lawyers checked files. Researchers answered phone calls. An entire machine had been set into motion. All because of one sentence. The boy who stayed. Charles stood beside the window. The witness statement lay open before him. Detroit. 15 years ago. Hotel fire. Unidentified black teenage male. Remained on scene until emergency responders arrived. Helped victim reach safety. Identity unknown. That was it. No name. No address. No follow-up. Just a fragment. One loose thread. Charles picked up another file. This one belonged to his younger brother, Ethan, now living in Seattle. Married. 2 children. Healthy. Alive. Alive because someone had stayed. The realization landed differently now. Because growing up wealthy often distorted gratitude. You thanked doctors, lawyers, pilots, professionals, people who were paid to help. But a stranger, A teenager? Someone who simply chose not to walk away? That kind of debt felt different. His assistant entered. "Sir." Charles turned. "What do we have?" The woman handed him another folder. Hospital security identified the taxi company. His pulse quickened slightly. "And?" "They're cooperating." Charles opened the file. Inside sat a driver profile, a photograph, employment records, address history, emergency contact, name, Malik Carter. Charles stared at the picture. Same face, same eyes, same man from the hospital footage, the man who had walked away, the man who spent money he didn't have, the man who expected nothing. Charles sat down slowly. For years, people had tried taking things from him. Money, access, influence, trust. Eventually, he stopped believing in generosity altogether. It felt safer, cleaner, simpler. Everybody wanted something. Everybody. Then along came a taxi driver who apparently wanted nothing at all. That possibility unsettled him more than greed ever had. Back at the shelter, afternoon sunlight spilled through stained glass windows. The church director, Reverend Thomas, approached Malik carrying a clipboard. Tall, kind-faced, the sort of man who listened more than he spoke. "Mind if I sit?" Malik shrugged. "Sure." The Reverend sat. For a while, neither man said anything. They watched Noah coloring. Finally, Reverend Thomas spoke. "You know what I learned after 30 years in ministry?" Malik smiled faintly. "Probably a lot." The older man chuckled. "Not as much as people think." He leaned back. "But one thing sticks." "What?" "The worst days usually arrive right before something changes." Malik looked at him. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." The Reverend smiled. "It's supposed to be true." Malik shook his head. "I lost everything today." The words sounded strange, spoken aloud. More real, more painful. The Reverend nodded. "Looks that way. Not exactly encouraging." "No." The older man folded his hands. "But losing everything and being finished aren't always the same thing." Malik stared out the window. At the parking lot. At the traffic beyond it. At a city that seemed determined not to notice him. "I don't know what comes next." "Nobody ever does." The Reverend stood. Then paused. "One more thing." Malik looked up. "Your nephew talks about you like you're a superhero." Malik laughed. "That kid needs better standards." "Maybe." The Reverend smiled. "Or maybe he sees something you don't." Then he walked away, leaving Malik alone with the thought. Meanwhile, at Whitmore Memorial Hospital, Henry Whitmore sat near a window overlooking the city. His memory drifted in and out like fog across water. Some moments were clear, others vanished before he could hold them. A nurse adjusted his blanket. Henry watched a bird land on the windowsill, then suddenly spoke. "The star." The nurse looked up. "What star?" "The wooden star." Her expression changed. "What wooden star?" Henry frowned, trying to pull something from deep inside his mind. The boy had it. The nurse immediately picked up the phone. Within minutes, the message reached Charles. The wooden star. Charles froze, because he knew exactly what that meant. His father had talked about it for years. A small wooden keychain, star-shaped, hand-carved, the only physical clue ever connected to the mysterious teenager from Detroit. It had disappeared after the fire. No one knew where it went. No one knew who owned it. No one knew why Henry never stopped searching for it. Charles immediately called the family archives office, then Detroit authorities, then a retired investigator. The answer arrived 2 hours later. The keychain had never been recovered. Officially. Unofficially. A witness had once reported seeing it in the teenager's possession before emergency crews arrived. Charles stared at the report. His heartbeat slowed. Because suddenly, this wasn't coincidence anymore. First the phrase, now the star. The pieces were moving, and every piece pointed toward one man, Malik Carter. As evening approached, Malik helped Noah carry donated blankets into a temporary room upstairs. The room was small, 2 beds, 1 dresser, 1 window. Temporary. Everything about it felt temporary. Noah placed his backpack beside the bed, then pulled out a folded drawing. Look. Malik smiled. Another masterpiece? The boy nodded proudly. He unfolded the paper. A taxi, a storm, a small stick figure standing beside an older man. Above them, written in uneven handwriting, "My uncle helps people." Malik looked away quickly. Emotion rose in his chest without warning. Noah noticed. "You okay?" "Yeah." His voice cracked slightly. "Yeah, buddy." Noah smiled. "Good." Then he climbed onto the bed and returned to coloring. Simple. Trusting. Certain that tomorrow would somehow be okay. Malik wished he possessed half that faith. Downstairs, the television suddenly shifted to a live news conference. Whitmore Hotels, downtown headquarters. Reporters gathered outside. Camera flashes exploded. A familiar face stepped toward the podium. Charles Whitmore. The billionaire looked calm, controlled, professional. But something about his eyes seemed different, more focused, more determined. The reporter asked the obvious question. "Have you identified the driver who saved your father?" Charles paused, just for a second, then answered, "Not yet." Technically true. He hadn't met Malik. Not yet. "But when I find him," Charles continued, "there are some debts my family has been trying to repay for a very long time." The room erupted with questions. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, but Charles was already stepping away. Because for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't searching for a ghost anymore. He was searching for a man. And less than 5 miles away, that man was sitting beside a church window, believing he had just lost everything. Neither one knew it. But by tomorrow morning, their paths would finally collide. The church shelter grew quiet after dark. Children settled into borrowed beds. Volunteers folded chairs and stacked supplies. The smell of soup from dinner still lingered faintly in the hallways. Outside, Chicago glowed beneath a blanket of clouds. Inside room 14, Malik Carter sat beside the window watching headlights move through the street below. Sleep refused to come. Too much had happened. Too much had been lost. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the tow truck pulling away with his taxi. Saw Noah sitting on a cardboard box. Saw Tasha trying not to cry. Saw Henry Whitmore shivering in the rain. One decision. One night. A chain reaction. The city had a strange way of collecting debts. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Tasha stepped inside. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either? Malik accepted one. Nope. She sat on the edge of the second bed. For a while, neither spoke. The room was small enough that silence felt personal. Finally, Tasha smiled. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "You save a billionaire and somehow end up homeless." Malik laughed despite himself. A short, exhausted laugh. "Yeah, not exactly a great business model." "No." The smile faded. Reality returned. Tasha looked toward the window. Do you regret it? The question lingered between them. Malik already knew his answer. No. You don't? He shook his head. No. Tasha studied him, trying to understand. Even after all this, Malik looked down at his coffee. Steam drifted upward, slowly disappearing. I keep thinking about my dad. Tasha nodded. She understood immediately. They both did. Some grief never needed explanation. If somebody had stopped sooner. His voice trailed away. Neither finished the sentence. They didn't need to. The room fell quiet again. Eventually, Tasha stood. You should try to sleep. Yeah. She reached the door, then paused. Malik. Yeah? A faint smile appeared. Noah still thinks you're a hero. The door closed softly behind her. Malik sat alone, staring into the darkness. Across the city, Charles Whitmore wasn't sleeping either. The top floor of Whitmore Tower remained brightly lit long after midnight. Lawyers, researchers, assistants, security personnel. The entire building felt awake. Charles stood in his office overlooking Lake Michigan. A file sat open on his desk. Malik Carter, age 32, taxi driver. No criminal record, no lawsuits, no scandals. Nothing, which somehow made him more interesting. Most people left trails, debts, conflicts, complications. Malik's file looked surprisingly ordinary, and ordinary people rarely became mysteries. A knock sounded at the door. Come in. A man entered. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharp eyes, family attorney, Richard Hale, the type of lawyer who noticed details other people missed. You wanted the Detroit records. Charles nodded. What did you find? Richard placed another folder on the desk. The fire happened 15 years ago. I know. The witness statements are incomplete. Charles frowned. Why? Because nobody thought they mattered. The attorney opened the file, pointing to several highlighted sections. Emergency crews focused on evacuations. Understandable. The unidentified teenager never gave a statement. Charles leaned forward. Why not? Richard hesitated, then answered quietly. Because he left. The room went still. Charles stared. He left? Richard nodded. Witnesses say he stayed long enough to help your brother. A pause, then disappeared before anyone could identify him. Charles looked down at the report. Something tightened in his chest. Because that sounded familiar. Painfully familiar. The hospital footage, the taxi driver. The same pattern. Help, disappear, ask for nothing. The attorney continued. There's more. Charles looked up. The teenager was described as African American. Silence. The estimated age matches. More silence. Richard folded his arms. I'm not saying it's the same person, but I've spent 20 years investigating people. The lawyer pointed toward Malik's file. And this doesn't feel like coincidence. For the first time all evening, Charles couldn't disagree. Meanwhile, at Whitmore Memorial Hospital, Henry Whitmore sat awake in bed. Moonlight spilled across the room. The old man held something in his hands. A worn photograph. The corners were bent. The image faded. Yet he stared at it as though it contained answers. A nurse approached quietly. Can't sleep? Henry smiled faintly. Too much thinking. She sat beside him. What are you looking at? The old man turned the picture slightly. The nurse saw flames, a damaged building, emergency vehicles, an old newspaper clipping, the hotel fire. Henry touched the image gently. The boy. The nurse recognized the phrase immediately. Everyone at the hospital did by now. The boy who stayed. He meant something to you. Henry nodded. Tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. He saved my family. The nurse remained silent, listening. People think money protects you. His voice sounded fragile. Takes a long time to learn it, doesn't? The old man stared toward the dark window. Sometimes your whole life changes because one person decides not to walk away. The nurse squeezed his hand. Neither noticed someone standing outside the room. Charles. He had arrived moments earlier and heard every word. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Chicago woke slowly. Traffic filled the streets. Coffee shops opened. Train platforms crowded. Another ordinary day. Except it wasn't. At 7:30 sharp, Charles Whitmore walked into his father's hospital room carrying a small cardboard box. Henry looked up. Curious, Charles set the box on the bed. What is it? I found something. Henry's hands trembled slightly. He opened the lid. Inside sat dozens of old documents, photos, newspaper clippings, investigator notes, every record connected to the mysterious teenager from Detroit. Henry stared. His eyes widened. You kept all this? Charles nodded. Mom did. A sad smile crossed Henry's face. For a moment he looked years younger. Your mother never gave up. No. Henry carefully lifted one newspaper clipping. A reporter had circled a sentence in red ink years ago. Unidentified teenager helped rescue victim. The old man's hands shook. 15 years. Charles sat beside him. Tell me about him. Henry looked surprised. You've never asked before. The words landed harder than intended. Because they were true. Charles had spent years dismissing the story, treating it like an old man's obsession, treating it like unfinished grief. Now he listened. Really listened. Henry smiled sadly. He wasn't supposed to stay. What do you mean? The smoke was getting worse. The old man's gaze drifted into memory. Everybody else was running away. Charles remained silent. He ran toward it. The room felt different, heavier, real. Henry continued. He could have left. A tear rolled down his cheek, but he stayed. Charles thought about the taxi driver, about the hospital footage, about the blanket, about the $12, about the way Malik walked away from gratitude twice. Something inside him began shifting, slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. For years, Charles had believed kindness always demanded payment. Now evidence suggested something far more uncomfortable. Sometimes it didn't. Meanwhile, across town, Malik stepped out of the church shelter and into the morning air. The sky was finally clear. For the first time in days, sunlight touched the city. He took a deep breath, trying to figure out what came next. No taxi, no apartment, no income, just uncertainty. His phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. Malik almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, he answered. Hello? A professional female voice responded. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Amanda Pierce. A brief pause. I'm calling on behalf of Charles Whitmore. Malik stopped walking. The world seemed to pause with him. Traffic continued. People moved around him. Yet everything felt strangely distant. "I'm sorry," Malik said. "I think you have the wrong number." "We don't." Amanda's voice remained calm. "Mr. Whitmore would like to meet you." Silence. Malik stared at the church steps, at the city, at nothing. Finally he spoke. "Why?" The answer arrived immediately. "Because you saved his father's life." And for the first time since that rainy night at the bus stop, Malik realized his decision had not disappeared into the darkness after all. Someone had followed it home. Malik stood motionless on the church steps. Morning traffic rolled past. A city bus groaned to a stop nearby. Someone laughed across the street. A siren echoed faintly in the distance. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. Yet everything felt strangely far away. "My father would like to meet you." The woman's voice remained calm on the phone. Professional. Carefully measured. Malik finally found his voice. "Look, I appreciate that he's okay. We appreciate what you did. You don't owe me anything." A pause. Then, "Mr. Carter." The woman sounded gentler now. "I don't think this is about owing you." Something about those words unsettled him, because he had spent his entire life expecting transactions. Work for money, pay rent for shelter, miss a payment, lose everything. Simple, predictable, but gratitude? Real gratitude? That was harder to trust. "When?" Malik asked. "This afternoon." He almost said no. Almost. Then he remembered Henry's face. The confusion, the fear, the old man's trembling voice, the boy who stayed. "Okay." Amanda Pierce exhaled softly, as if she'd been expecting resistance. "We'll send transportation." No, the answer came immediately. The last thing Malik wanted was a luxury car arriving at a church shelter. "I'll get there." Amanda hesitated, then agreed. "We'll text the address." The call ended. Malik stared at the phone. His reflection looked back from the dark screen. Tired eyes, unshaven face. A man who had lost everything 48 hours ago, and somehow found himself invited into the world of billionaires. The situation felt absurd. Behind him, the church doors opened. Noah stepped outside holding a juice box. "Who was that?" Malik smiled. "A work thing." The boy narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "No, it wasn't." "You getting smart?" "I've always been smart." That made Malik laugh. Noah grinned proudly, then asked the question children always asked. "Is everything gonna be okay?" The question landed differently this time, because for the first time in days, Malik wasn't completely sure the answer was no. "I think so." Noah nodded, satisfied, then ran back inside. Children accepted hope much easier than adults. Across the city, Charles Whitmore sat inside his father's hospital room. The old man appeared stronger today. Color had returned to his face. The shaking had lessened. But his eyes remained fixed on the cardboard archive box sitting beside the bed. Charles watched him carefully. "You've been looking through those for an hour." Henry smiled faintly. "Feels longer." The old man's fingers rested on a faded newspaper clipping. Detroit. 15 years earlier. Fire damages downtown hotel. Several rescued. Investigation ongoing. Nothing remarkable. Nothing extraordinary. Yet Henry studied it as if it contained buried treasure. Charles finally pulled a chair closer. "Dad." Henry looked up. "What?" "I found the driver." Silence. The old man's expression changed immediately. Hope. Pure hope. The kind usually seen in children, not 80-year-old men. You did? Charles nodded. His name is Malik Carter. Henry repeated the name quietly, as though testing it, as though tasting it. Malik Carter. Something flickered across his face. A memory trying to surface, almost there. Not quite. Then gone again. Does he know? Charles frowned. Know what? Henry looked toward the window, toward the skyline, toward 15 years of unfinished gratitude. That we've been looking for him. Charles didn't answer, because Malik didn't know. Not yet. And neither did Charles. Not completely. A knock interrupted them. Richard Hale entered carrying another file. The attorney's expression was different, more serious, more focused. Charles noticed immediately. What is it? Richard closed the door, then placed the file on the bed. We found something. Henry looked up. Charles leaned forward. The lawyer opened the folder. Inside sat a photograph. Old, slightly damaged. Taken after the Detroit fire. Emergency responders, police vehicles, crowds gathered behind barriers. The image wasn't remarkable at first glance, until Richard pointed toward the corner. There. Charles squinted. A teenager stood partially visible near an ambulance. African American. Maybe 17. Maybe younger. Hard to tell. The photograph quality was poor, but something immediately stood out. The boy held something in his hand. A wooden object. Star-shaped. Henry suddenly inhaled sharply. The star. The room went silent. Charles stared. The wooden star. The object his father mentioned countless times over the years. The object connected to the mysterious teenager. The object everyone assumed had vanished forever. Henry's eyes filled with tears. He had it. Charles looked between the photo and his father. You recognize it? Henry nodded, slowly, emotionally. I gave it to him. The words landed like thunder. Charles froze. Richard froze. Even the nurse standing nearby stopped moving. What? Henry looked at the photograph, his voice barely above a whisper. I gave it to him. Charles felt his pulse quicken. Because this was new, entirely new. You never told anyone that. The old man smiled sadly. I forgot. A pause. Until now. Memory returned in fragments, tiny pieces floating back to shore. Henry closed his eyes. He was sitting outside the hotel. Charles remained silent, listening. He looked scared. The old man swallowed. Young. His fingers tightened around the photograph. I had the star in my pocket. Another pause. I told him brave people should keep brave things. Charles stared. His father wasn't guessing, wasn't confused. He remembered. Every word felt real. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier. Because suddenly the mystery had changed. This wasn't simply a stranger helping during a fire. There was a connection. A moment, an exchange, something personal. Henry opened his eyes again. The star said something. Charles leaned closer. What? The old man smiled through tears. For the boy who stayed. The room went completely silent. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because every person present understood they had just uncovered the missing piece. The phrase, the star, the memory, everything connected. Meanwhile, Malik sat on a city train heading downtown. The church had given him a clean shirt, One of the volunteers lent him a blazer. Not expensive, not perfect, but respectable. He felt awkward wearing it, like a man borrowing somebody else's life. The train rattled north through the city. Steel tracks, brick buildings, graffiti-covered walls, neighborhoods changing block by block. The further downtown he traveled, the more the scenery transformed. Old storefronts became glass towers. Corner markets became luxury retailers. Bus stops became valet stations. Different worlds, same city. His phone buzzed. Amanda Pierce. One text. Whitmore Tower, 2 p.m. Another message followed. Mr. Whitmore is looking forward to meeting you. Malik stared at the words. Looking forward. The phrase felt strange. Most wealthy people he'd encountered barely noticed him. Now one of the richest men in Chicago was waiting to meet him. The train slowed. Downtown approached. His reflection appeared in the window. For a brief moment, Malik thought about turning around, going back to the shelter, back to familiar problems, back to ordinary life. Then Henry's face appeared in his memory. You didn't leave. The old man's words echoed softly. Everyone leaves. But you stayed. Malik looked out the window, toward the skyline, toward Whitmore Tower rising above the city, toward answers he didn't even know he was missing. And miles away, inside a hospital room, Henry Whitmore held the old photograph in trembling hands. The wooden star, the forgotten phrase, the boy who stayed. For 15 years, the Whitmore family had searched for a ghost. Now they finally had a name. What none of them knew yet was that the biggest surprise wasn't who Malik Carter had become. It was who he had been all along. Whitmore Tower rose above downtown Chicago like a piece of another world. Glass, steel, money. The kind of building people photographed but rarely entered. Malik stood across the street staring up at it. His borrowed blazer suddenly felt too small. His worn shoes felt too obvious. The shelter address card remained folded in his pocket. A reminder of where he had slept the night before. The revolving doors spun endlessly as executives moved in and out. Nobody looked at him twice. And yet for some reason, he felt every stare, every insecurity, every mile between his life and theirs. He took a breath, then crossed the street. Inside, the lobby gleamed beneath polished marble and soft golden light. Fresh flowers sat on a reception desk larger than most apartments Malik had lived in. Security personnel stood near the elevators. Professional, alert. One of them stepped forward. Can I help you? Malik reached for the text message. Before he could speak, another voice interrupted. Mr. Carter? A woman approached quickly. Mid-30s, sharp suit, warm smile. Amanda Pierce, the voice from the phone. She extended her hand. I'm glad you came. Malik shook it. Still uncertain. Still expecting this to somehow be a mistake. This way. The elevator ride lasted less than a minute. Yet it felt longer. Chicago shrank beneath them. Buildings became models. Cars became dots. The city stretched endlessly beyond the windows. Amanda led him down a quiet hallway, finally stopping before large wooden doors. She paused. For the first time all afternoon, her professional demeanor softened. Mr. Whitmore has been waiting for this meeting for a very long time. Malik frowned. What do you mean? Amanda simply smiled, then opened the door. The office beyond looked more like a private library than a corporate headquarters. Bookshelves, leather chairs, large windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and standing near the glass, Charles Whitmore. The billionaire turned slowly. For a moment neither man spoke, neither smiled. Neither knew exactly where to begin. Charles crossed the room first. "Mr. Carter." His voice sounded calmer than Malik expected. "Thank you for coming." Malik nodded. "Thank you for inviting me." They shook hands. The gesture felt surprisingly normal. Not powerful. Not dramatic. Just human. Charles motioned toward a chair. "Please." Malik sat. Amanda quietly closed the door behind them, leaving the two men alone. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then Charles spoke. "My father is alive because of you." Malik immediately shook his head. "I just happened to be there." "No." Charles looked directly at him. "You stopped." The distinction mattered. Both men knew it. 100 people could have passed that bus stop. Only one had stopped. Charles continued. "The doctors said another 10 minutes could have changed everything." Malik looked away. The praise made him uncomfortable. It wasn't a big deal. Charles almost laughed, because from where he sat, it seemed like a very big deal. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Charles reached into a drawer and placed an old photograph on the desk. Malik glanced down. His stomach tightened. Smoke. Emergency vehicles. A damaged hotel. A scene he hadn't thought about in years. Detroit. 15 years ago. Charles watched his reaction carefully. "You recognize it?" It wasn't a question. Malik nodded slowly. "Yeah." The room felt different now. More personal. More dangerous somehow. Charles slid another item across the desk. A faded newspaper clipping. Then another. Then another. Malik stared. His pulse quickened. Because every document connected to the same night. The hotel fire. The rescue. The boy. A memory long buried suddenly surfaced. Smoke choking the hallways. People shouting. Emergency lights flashing. And a younger version of himself. 17 years old. Terrified. Running toward danger because someone needed help. Charles finally asked the question. "Were you there?" Malik looked at the photograph again, then nodded. "Yeah." Silence. Heavy silence. Charles sat back slowly. 15 years. 15 years of questions. 15 years of searching, and the answer was sitting directly across from him. "You saved my brother." The words barely sounded real. Malik rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed, almost uncomfortable. "It wasn't like that." Charles stared. "What do you mean?" "There were firefighters. There weren't enough. There were other people helping." Charles shook his head. "The reports say you carried him out." Malik looked toward the window. Toward the city. Toward anywhere except Charles. Because he never liked being the center of attention. Not then, not now. "I did what anybody would have done." Charles actually laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. "No." His voice softened. "That's the whole point." Malik looked back at him. Charles leaned forward. "My family has spent 15 years trying to find you." The room went still. Malik blinked, trying to process the statement. "What?" "My father hired investigators." Charles opened another folder. Newspaper ads, private investigator reports, reward notices. Years of searching. Years of trying. Years of gratitude with nowhere to go. Malik stared at the evidence, completely stunned. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. Charles looked genuinely surprised. Why? Malik nodded. Yeah. Charles stared at him, then slowly answered. Because you saved my brother's life. The simplicity of the response hit harder than expected. Malik looked down. His throat tightened slightly. Nobody had ever searched for him before. Nobody had ever spent years trying to say thank you. The idea felt almost impossible. A knock interrupted them. The door opened. Amanda stepped inside. Sir? Charles glanced up. What is it? Her expression had changed. Something urgent. Something unexpected. Your father. Both men stood immediately. Is he okay? Charles asked. He's fine, Amanda smiled. But he insists on coming here. Charles blinked. What? He left the hospital. 5 minutes later, the office doors opened again. Henry Whitmore entered slowly. A doctor followed, then a nurse, then 2 extremely nervous security guards. The old man ignored all of them. His eyes searched the room, searching, then stopped. On Malik, everything else disappeared. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room felt suspended in time. Henry stared. Tears immediately filled his eyes. Malik stood awkwardly, unsure what to do, unsure what was happening. Then Henry whispered something, barely audible. The boy. The old man's voice broke. The boy stayed. A tear rolled down his cheek. Charles looked away. Amanda looked away. Even the security guards suddenly found the floor fascinating, because everyone understood this moment belonged to somebody else. Henry stepped forward, slowly, carefully, then reached into his coat pocket. His trembling hand emerged holding something small, something wooden, something familiar. Malik's breath caught instantly. A star, hand-carved, worn smooth by time. The wooden star. For a second, the room disappeared. The years disappeared. The distance disappeared. Only the memory remained. A frightened teenager. A hotel lobby. An old man offering a small gift. For the boy who stayed. Malik stared at the star, then at Henry, then back again. And suddenly he understood. The mystery. The phrase. The search. Everything. The old man smiled through tears. I never stopped looking. The words landed like thunder. And for the first time since that rainy night at the bus stop, Malik Carter realized that the stranger he had rescued wasn't just a lost old man. He was a piece of his own forgotten past, and neither man would ever see that rainy night the same way again. For several seconds, nobody in the office spoke. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls. Cars crawled through downtown traffic. Boats drifted across Lake Michigan. Life continued. But inside that office, time seemed to stop. Malik stared at the wooden star resting in Henry Whitmore's trembling hand. 15 years. 15 years since he had seen it. Back then, he had been a scared 17-year-old kid with smoke in his lungs and no idea what tomorrow would look like. Now he was 32, homeless, jobless, and standing inside one of the most expensive offices in Chicago. Life had a strange sense of humor. Henry smiled through tears. I knew I'd find you. Malik let out a quiet breath. No, sir. His voice was gentle. You didn't. The old man looked confused. Malik smiled softly. You found me twice. For a moment, Henry simply stared. Then laughter broke through the tears. A real laugh. the kind that only comes after years of carrying something heavy. Charles watched the exchange silently. Something inside him felt unfamiliar. Not admiration, not gratitude. Something deeper. Humility. For years he had believed money solved problems. Not all problems, but most. Then he watched an old man and a former teenager reconnect through nothing more than kindness. No contracts, no negotiations, no transactions, just humanity. The thing wealth could never manufacture. Henry carefully placed the wooden star into Malik's hand. Keep it. Malik immediately shook his head. No. It belongs to you. It belongs to you. The old man smiled. It always belonged to you. Malik looked down at the star. The wood felt smooth from years of handling. Years of searching. Years of remembering. He swallowed hard. Because suddenly he understood something. Henry hadn't spent 15 years looking for a hero. He'd spent 15 years trying to say thank you. That realization somehow hurt more than all the praise. Charles cleared his throat. There's something else. The room shifted. The emotional reunion slowly gave way to reality. Charles walked toward his desk, opened a drawer, removed a large envelope, then placed it in front of Malik. Malik frowned. What is that? Charles sat down. A beginning. Malik already didn't like the sound of it. Charles slid the envelope closer. Inside sat a certified check. The number printed across the center made Malik blink twice. Then a third time. His heart nearly stopped. The amount was more money than he had ever seen attached to his own name. Enough to buy a house. Enough to erase debt. Enough to change everything overnight. The room remained silent. Charles waited. Henry waited. Amanda waited. Even the attorney near the door waited. Everyone expected emotion, shock, gratitude, relief. Instead, Malik slowly closed the envelope and pushed it back across the desk. Nobody moved. Charles stared. I don't understand. Malik nodded. I know. Charles blinked. You don't want it? The question sounded almost absurd. Most people would have accepted before the sentence finished. Most people would have cried. Most people would have called family. Malik simply shook his head. No. The room fell silent again. Henry looked confused. Amanda looked stunned. The attorney looked like he had forgotten how money worked. Charles leaned forward. Malik. His voice remained calm. This isn't charity. I know. This is gratitude. I know. Charles frowned. Then why? Malik looked down at his hands, at the wooden star, at the memories attached to it, then slowly looked back up. Because that's not why I did it. Silence. Heavy silence. The city outside seemed very far away. Charles stared, trying to understand, trying to find the angle, the motivation, the hidden reason. Years of business had trained him to search for leverage. Everyone wanted something. Everyone. Yet the man sitting across from him kept breaking the equation. I wasn't thinking about money when I stopped. Malik's voice remained calm. I wasn't thinking about rewards when I pulled your brother out. Another pause. If I take this, he tapped the envelope gently. It changes what those moments meant. Henry's eyes filled again. Charles looked away briefly, because the words hit harder than expected. The billionaire had spent decades surrounded by transactions, donations with publicity clauses, partnerships disguised as friendships, kindness attached to invoices. Everything cost something. Everything. Until now. The attorney finally spoke. "What exactly are you saying?" Malik turned toward him. "I'm saying some things shouldn't be for sale." The room fell completely silent. No one had an answer to that. Not immediately. Charles stood, walked toward the windows, looked down at the city below. People looked tiny from this height. Problems looked tiny too, but he knew better. Distance changed appearance, not reality. Behind him, Malik remained seated, quiet, patient. The same man who had walked away from a hospital without leaving his name. The same man who had spent his last dollars on a stranger. The same man who had lost everything afterward, and somehow still refused the money. Charles finally turned around. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking like a businessman. He wasn't calculating, wasn't negotiating, wasn't solving. He was listening. "What do you need?" The question surprised everyone, especially Malik. Charles repeated it. "What do you actually need?" Malik opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because nobody had asked him that in a very long time. Not what he wanted, not what he deserved, what he needed. A different question, a more dangerous one. His mind immediately filled with images. Noah sitting on cardboard boxes, the church shelter, Mrs. Alvarez locking the apartment, the taxi being towed away, the South Side bus stop where elderly people stood in freezing weather because transportation failed them every day. The answer slowly formed, unexpected, clear, certain. Finally, Malik spoke. "I need you to see something." Charles frowned. "What?" "A bus stop." The billionaire blinked. "A bus stop?" Malik nodded. "Tomorrow." Nobody understood. Not yet. But something in Malik's voice stopped further questions. The conversation ended there. An hour later, Malik left Whitmore Tower. The envelope remained on Charles's desk. Untouched, the wooden star sat safely in his pocket. The late afternoon sun painted downtown gold. For the first time in days, he felt lighter. Not because his problems were solved. They weren't. He still had no apartment, no taxi, no income, no plan. Yet somehow he felt lighter, because a debt he never knew existed had finally been paid, not with money, with gratitude. Across the city, Charles remained standing by the office window long after everyone left. The envelope sat unopened. The check still inside. Worth a fortune. Worth absolutely nothing. At least to Malik. Henry slowly approached beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The skyline glowed beneath the setting sun. Finally, Henry smiled. "I told you." Charles glanced toward him. "Told me what?" The old man chuckled. "Some people help because it's who they are." Charles looked down at the streets below, at thousands of strangers moving through the city, then thought about the taxi driver, the shelter, the wooden star, the refused fortune, the impossible integrity. For years he had believed generosity always came with a hidden invoice. Today, that belief had cracked, not shattered, not completely, but cracked. And through that crack, something new had begun to grow. The next morning, Charles Whitmore would follow Malik Carter to a forgotten bus stop on the South Side. What he would see there would change far more than one man's life. It would change an entire neighborhood. The next morning arrived bright and cold. For the first time in nearly a week, Chicago woke beneath a clear blue sky. Sunlight reflected off windows. Traffic filled the streets. People hurried toward jobs, schools, appointments, and responsibilities. Life moved forward. It always did. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black SUV rolled to a stop outside the church shelter. Several volunteers peeked through the windows. Noah nearly pressed his face against the glass. "That's definitely not a work thing," he announced. Tasha laughed for the first time in days. Malik shook his head. "I never said it was." Noah crossed his arms. "Yeah, you kinda did." A few minutes later, Malik climbed into the SUV. Charles Whitmore sat in the back seat. No assistants, no attorneys, no reporters. Just Charles. The billionaire glanced over. Morning, morning. For a while neither spoke. The city passed outside the windows. Downtown slowly disappeared behind them. Glass towers gave way to older buildings. Then older buildings gave way to neighborhoods that rarely appeared on postcards. Charles finally broke the silence. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." The answer sounded familiar. Charles almost smiled. An hour earlier, he would have found the mystery irritating. Today, he simply waited. The SUV eventually turned onto the south side, past aging apartment buildings, past closed storefronts, past streets that seemed forgotten by people with power. Finally, Malik pointed. "There." The driver pulled over. Charles looked outside. Confused. A bus stop. Nothing more. Nothing less. The same one. The exact bus stop where Malik had found Henry. The shelter glass remained cracked. Paint peeled from nearby benches. The schedule board had missing panels. A trash can overflowed beside the curb. Several people waited there. An elderly woman with a walker. A single mother holding a toddler. A man in hospital scrubs. 2 teenagers carrying school backpacks. Ordinary people. Invisible people. The kind most of the city never noticed. Charles frowned. "This is what you wanted me to see?" Malik nodded. "Watch." For the next 30 minutes, they sat inside the SUV. Nobody spoke. People came. People left. A city bus arrived late. Then another failed to arrive at all. The elderly woman checked her watch repeatedly. The mother bounced her child on her hip. The man in scrubs eventually gave up and started walking. Halfway through the observation, a light rain began falling. Not enough for umbrellas, just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Nobody moved. They had nowhere else to go. Charles continued watching. Slowly. Carefully. The longer he sat there, the more details he noticed. The woman with the walker was carrying hospital paperwork. The young mother repeatedly checked a text message mentioning a job interview. One teenager quietly shared his jacket with the other. The small moments added up. Human stories, tiny struggles, tiny victories, an entire neighborhood balancing on fragile routines. Eventually, Charles looked toward Malik. "I don't understand." Malik nodded. "I know." Then he pointed toward the bus stop again. "My father used to stand at places like this." Charles remained silent. "My neighbors stand at places like this." Another pause. "My nephew stands at places like this." The billionaire followed Malik's gaze. Toward the people waiting. Toward the people enduring. Toward the people nobody photographed. Malik continued. "When my dad died, it took an ambulance too long to get there." Charles listened. "When people miss work around here because transportation fails," Malik looked away. "They lose jobs." The words landed quietly, but heavily. "When elderly people miss appointments," He pointed toward the woman with the walker. They get sicker. Charles watched the woman carefully now. Really watched. For the first time. When single moms miss interviews, Malik nodded toward the young woman holding the child. They fall further behind. The billionaire slowly understood. This wasn't about buses. Not really. It was about access, opportunity, dignity, the things money quietly purchased every day, the things millions of people lacked. Malik finally turned toward him. You offered to help me. Charles nodded. I did. I appreciate that. A pause. But I'm not the real problem. The billionaire stared, then looked back toward the bus stop. Suddenly the answer appeared. Not completely, but enough. The pieces began connecting. The church shelter, the taxi company, the eviction, the old man in the rain. Everything led back to one simple truth. People were stranded, not just physically, financially, socially, emotionally, systemically. And Malik wasn't asking for rescue. He was asking for infrastructure. Hope. A bridge. Charles sat quietly for a long time. Long enough for another bus to arrive late. Long enough for the elderly woman to nearly miss it. Long enough for a volunteer from a nearby church to help her climb aboard. Finally, he asked, "What would you do?" Malik didn't hesitate, because he had already thought about it. Many times. For years. A transportation service. Charles looked at him. Like taxis? Not exactly. Malik shook his head. A community ride program. His voice grew stronger, more confident. The way people sounded when speaking about something they truly believed. Hospital appointments. He pointed toward the elderly woman. School transportation. Toward the teenagers. Job interviews. Toward the young mother. Senior citizens. Disabled residents. People trying to get somewhere important, but getting left behind. Charles listened carefully. The idea sounded simple, yet powerful. Malik continued. People don't need handouts. A pause. They need a ride. The words hit Charles harder than expected, because suddenly he understood why Malik rejected the check. The money would have solved one person's problem. This idea could solve hundreds, maybe thousands. The billionaire stared through the windshield, at the neighborhood, at the bus stop, at the possibility. And then something unexpected happened. He felt excited. Not the excitement of business, not the excitement of profit. Something rarer. Purpose. Hours later, they stood inside an empty warehouse near the south side, a former transportation depot, unused for years. Dust covered the floors. Old equipment sat forgotten in corners. Broken office furniture lined the walls. Most people would have seen a dead building. Malik saw potential. Charles saw it too. The billionaire slowly turned. You really thought this through? Malik smiled. Long bus rides give you time. Charles laughed. A real laugh. Then he looked around again. The warehouse. The location. The possibilities. Finally, he spoke. How many vehicles would it take? Malik blinked. What? To start. The question hung in the air. Heavy. Real. Charles wasn't brainstorming anymore. He was planning. Malik stared. For the first time all day, words failed him. The billionaire continued. 10? 20? 100 eventually? Malik laughed softly. Part disbelief, part hope. The dangerous kind. The the kind people avoid after disappointment. Charles noticed and understood. So instead of promising anything, he simply extended his hand. "Let's build it." Silence. Then another voice interrupted. "I was hoping you'd say that." They turned. Henry Whitmore stood in the doorway, supported by a cane, smiling. The old man looked tired, but happy. Truly happy. Behind him stood Tasha, Noah, Amanda, even Reverend Thomas. Someone had arranged transportation. Somehow, everyone important had arrived. Noah immediately ran toward Malik. "Uncle Malik!" The boy stopped beside him, then looked around the giant warehouse, eyes wide. "What is this place?" Malik looked toward Charles, then toward Henry, then toward the neighborhood beyond the windows. Finally, he smiled. For the first time in a long time, the smile came easily. "I think," he said quietly, "it's a beginning." And though nobody realized it yet, the biggest gift Charles Whitmore planned to give Malik Carter still hadn't been revealed. The surprise waiting at the end of this journey would change not only Malik's future, but who owned that future forever. 1 year later. Rain tapped softly against the windows of a building that no longer looked abandoned. The old warehouse on the south side had transformed into something nobody thought possible. Bright signs hung above freshly painted walls. Clean vehicles lined a covered loading area. Employees moved through the building carrying clipboards, coffee cups, and schedules. Phones rang. Engines started. Doors opened and closed. Life flowed through the place like blood through a living heart. Above the entrance, large silver letters stretched across a blue sign. "Stay with me rides." Underneath, smaller words read, "Community Transportation Cooperative." Owned by the people it serves, the phrase had been Noah's idea. Malik never changed it. He stood near the entrance watching drivers prepare for the morning rush. Hospital appointments, school transportation, senior pickups, job interview routes. Every vehicle already had somewhere important to be. A year earlier, none of this existed. Now more than 60 drivers worked for the cooperative. Thousands of rides had been provided. Hundreds of families depended on it. And every single day began the same way, with purpose. A dispatcher approached. "Morning, boss." Malik smiled. He still wasn't used to that word. "Morning, Sandra." She handed him a tablet. 23 medical transports before noon. He nodded. "Good. 3 new volunteer drivers start today." "Good. 1 city council member wants a tour." Malik laughed. "That's less good." Sandra grinned, then headed back toward the operations desk. The building buzzed around him, people moving, working, helping, exactly as he'd imagined, and exactly as he'd never believed possible. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You still get here before everybody." Malik turned. Henry Whitmore stood near the entrance. 81 years old now, cane in one hand, umbrella in the other, smiling. The sight still warmed Malik's heart. Not because Henry remembered everything. Most days he didn't. The illness continued its slow work. Some mornings were clear, others weren't. But somehow, whenever Henry walked through these doors, he seemed to remember enough. "Morning, Henry." The old man smiled wider. "Morning, son." Malik walked over, carefully taking the umbrella. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." Henry shrugged. "It's Chicago." "Fair point." They laughed. For a while they simply stood watching the drivers. The old man's eyes moved across the building, across the vehicles, across the people, across the evidence that kindness had multiplied. Finally, he spoke. You built this? Malik shook his head. No. He looked around. We built it. Henry nodded, because that answer sounded exactly right. Across the parking lot, another vehicle arrived. A black SUV, still expensive, still polished, still unmistakably Charles Whitmore. The billionaire stepped out carrying coffee. No entourage, no reporters, no photographers. That part had surprised the media most. The project had become one of the biggest success stories in Chicago. Yet Charles never placed his name on the building, never demanded recognition, never requested ownership, never inserted himself into the spotlight. At first, journalists assumed it was a publicity strategy. Then months passed, then more months, and nothing changed. Eventually, people stopped questioning it. Truth has a strange way of surviving longer than suspicion. Charles approached, carrying 3 coffee cups. Morning. Morning. Henry immediately pointed. You're late. Charles laughed. I'm 3 minutes early. Late. The old man remained unconvinced. Malik smiled. Some things never changed. They moved into the main office. Large windows overlooked the transportation yard. Vehicles came and went. Drivers checked schedules. Passengers arrived. A system working exactly as intended. Charles handed Malik a folder. The moment he saw it, Malik groaned. No. Charles smiled. Yes. No. Definitely yes. Henry looked delighted, which immediately worried Malik. Whenever those two agreed on something, trouble usually followed. What is it? Charles leaned back. Open it. Reluctantly, Malik did. The folder contained legal documents, property records, corporate filings, ownership agreements. His eyes narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. He read everything twice, because the words didn't make sense the first time, or the second. Finally, he looked up, Charles. The billionaire remained silent, waiting. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. Malik looked back down at the paperwork, then back up, then down again. The cooperative, the vehicles, the warehouse, the transportation network. Everything. Ownership transferred, not to Charles, not to investors, not to a corporation, to the cooperative itself, to the drivers, to the community. Permanent. Protected. Irrevocable. Malik stared, speechless. For one of the few times in his life. Charles finally spoke. A year ago you told me something. The room fell quiet. You said not to save you. Malik remembered. The bus stop, the rain, the neighborhood, the conversation that changed everything. Save this place. Charles nodded. So I did. Emotion rose unexpectedly in Malik's chest, because he understood what this meant. Most wealthy people donated money. Charles had surrendered control. A far rarer gift, a far harder one. Henry smiled softly. My son finally learned something. Charles rolled his eyes. Careful. But he was smiling too. The old man pointed toward Malik. That's what happens when good people teach you. The room filled with quiet laughter. Outside, rain continued falling. The kind of gentle rain that makes cities feel smaller, closer, more human. Later that afternoon, Malik drove one of the community vehicles himself. He still did that several times each week, Not because he had to, because he wanted to. The route took him through neighborhoods he knew by heart, past schools, past churches, past grocery stores, past bus stops. The city looked different now, not because Chicago had changed, because he had. At a red light, he glanced toward a familiar corner, a bus stop. Not the same one, but close. A young woman stood there holding a little girl beneath a broken umbrella. The child looked cold. The woman looked exhausted. Malik immediately recognized the expression. The math. The worry? The invisible weight. He pulled over. The woman looked confused as he opened the passenger door. "Ma'am?" She approached cautiously. "Yes? You headed somewhere important?" She laughed softly. "A job interview." The answer felt familiar. Very familiar. Rain tapped against the roof. Cars moved past. Life continued. The little girl shivered slightly. Without hesitation, Malik reached over and turned off the fare meter. The click sounded almost identical to the one from a year ago. The same sound. The same choice. The same heart. The woman looked concerned. "I don't have much money." Malik smiled. Neither Henry nor Charles nor the city could see him now. This moment belonged only to him. And somehow that made it perfect. "That's okay." The little girl climbed into the back seat. The woman followed, still uncertain, still surprised. Malik gently pulled away from the curb. Rain streaked across the windshield. The city glowed beyond it. Warm lights, wet pavement, endless possibilities. As they drove, the woman finally asked, "Why would you do this?" Malik glanced briefly into the rearview mirror. For a second he thought about the bus stop, the rain, the old man, the wooden star, the shelter, the warehouse, the cooperative, the thousands of lives touched by one decision. Then he smiled, a calm, genuine smile, because somebody once did it for me. The woman looked confused, but the little girl smiled, and somehow that felt enough. The vehicle disappeared into the rain. Behind it, Stay With Me rides continued serving the city. Henry Whitmore sat peacefully by a window. Charles Whitmore finally slept without carrying old debts. Tasha had a home. Noah was thriving in school. Drivers had jobs. Patients made appointments. Families reached opportunities. And somewhere in Chicago, kindness kept moving from one set of hands to another. Just as it always had. Just as it always would. Because the greatest thing Malik Carter ever built wasn't a transportation company. It wasn't a cooperative. It wasn't even a second chance. It was proof that one act of kindness does not end when it is repaid. It simply changes drivers and keeps going, forever. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. If you believe one small act of kindness can change a life, leave a simple one in the comments. And if you've ever helped someone when it wasn't easy, leave a 2. No long story needed. Just one number. I read the comments, and every single one reminds me that there are still good people out there. And if this story touched your heart, take a second to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There's another powerful story waiting for you next time. Another ordinary person, another unexpected act of kindness, and another life-changing moment that proves hope is still alive in this world. Until then, take care of yourself. Take care of someone else when you can. And remember, sometimes the smallest thing you do for a stranger becomes the biggest thing that ever happens to them. See you in the next story.